Have you ever been in a deeply serious situation, a funeral, an intense argument, a moment of profound bad news, and suddenly, against your own will, a smile creeps onto your face? Or worse, a laugh escapes your throat? You try to swallow it down, you bite the inside of your cheek, horrified by your own reaction, but the harder you fight it, the more it bubbles up. You sit there feeling like a monster while the person across from you looks at you in sheer disbelief. Society is quick to diagnose this. We're told that laughing at inappropriate times makes you insensitive, immature, or even toxic. We're conditioned to assume that laughter is always a byproduct of amusement, and that if you smile during a tragedy, you must be lacking empathy. But when you did it, you weren't amused. You weren't finding joy in the pain. You were terrified. At first glance, it is easy to assume that your emotional wires are simply crossed, or that you're just cold. But that explanation doesn't quite land, because you didn't start out cold, and if you truly didn't care, you wouldn't feel the crushing weight of guilt afterward. What if I told you that your nervous laughter is not a sign of emotional detachment, but a highly evolved, deeply protective psychological response? What if your brain isn't making light of the situation, but is actually desperately trying to keep you from shattering entirely? Before we uncover the hidden psychology behind why your mind pulls this sudden disappearing act with your emotions, I want you to do something right now. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the most painfully awkward situation you have ever accidentally laughed in? For most people, heavy moments trigger an immediate and predictable response: tears, anger, or silence. But for you, the intense pressure triggers an entirely different mechanism. Psychologists refer to this as a paradoxical emotion. To understand why your body betrays you with a laugh, we have to look at what is actually happening inside your nervous system during a moment of high stress. When you are confronted with a situation that is overwhelmingly heavy, your fear center floods your body with adrenaline. You are thrust into fight, flight, or freeze. But sometimes the emotional stimulus is simply too immense. The grief, the fear, or the conflict is so intense that the brain cannot process it linearly. Your emotional container is completely full, and the psychological pressure is building to a breaking point. Your nervous system is literally overheating. In that fraction of a second, the brain must find a release valve to discharge the unbearable tension. And biologically speaking, laughter is one of the most efficient ways to expel physical and emotional energy. You don't laugh because the situation is funny. You laugh because your nervous system is suffocating and it is gasping for air. But there is a second layer to this, a plot twist that highly thinkers and highly observant people often fall into. To truly understand why your mind operates this way, we have to look back at how your nervous system was programmed in the first place. This behavior doesn't appear out of nowhere. It often starts in a childhood where you had to grow up entirely too fast. Perhaps you were the peacekeeper, the quiet achiever, the child who learned early on to read the tension in the room before the adults even spoke. When a child is consistently put in charge of emotional regulation, either their own or others, it creates something called hypervigilance. You learned that your needs were dangerous and theirs were urgent. You learned that anger and sadness from the adults around you were a threat to your safety. But you also learned a survival skill. If you could smile, if you could make a joke, if you could just keep the energy light, you could de-escalate the danger. You learned that a smile was a shield. So, as an adult, when a confrontation arises or when a tragedy strikes, your brain instantly reverts to that factory setting. You're performing a complex psychological defense mechanism in milliseconds. When you smile during a heated argument with your partner, you're not mocking them. You're experiencing an unconscious appeasement gesture. Neuroscience tells us that the brain has a mirror neuron system that allows us to feel empathy, but it doesn't distinguish between healthy empathy and destructive empathy. Your highly sensitive brain absorbs all the anger in the room, and your nervous system literally waves a white flag, trying to signal, "I am not a threat, please do not hurt me." But the irony here is staggering and often agonizing, because the other person sees your smile, assumes you don't care, and gets angrier. And the angrier they get, the more your nervous system panics, which causes you to smile or laugh even harder. It is a vicious, terrifying loop of miscommunication. You are so focused on surviving the emotional onslaught that your brain sacrifices the one socially acceptable emotion you actually need to display. The true pain of nervous laughter, however, doesn't usually happen in the moment. It happens later. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're lying in bed when suddenly your brain decides to replay that exact awkward conversation. You dissect every word, every pause, every facial expression the other person made, wondering if they secretly think you're a sociopath. When you replay conversations in your head, you're not analyzing them, you're trying to rewrite yourself. You convince yourself that one stumble in conversation means you're fundamentally broken. You forget that human memory does not function like a video, but more like a story that gets edited every time you tell it again. The more you watch it, your mental image of the fictional version will start to become even more real, which means your brain is essentially gaslighting you with your own memories. You build a case against yourself, collecting evidence that you are somehow defective or fundamentally unworthy of connection. This brings us to a quiet cliffhanger that highly independent minds often fall into. When you become too self-critical about your perceived social failures, isolation becomes your default safety mechanism. Because you are terrified of reacting wrong in heavy situations, you start to avoid them altogether. You pull away from conflict. You retreat into your solitude, falling in love with your empty house because peace feels better than the hard work of vulnerability. You convince yourself that you are better off entirely alone. But true kindness and true healing must include yourself. The true tragedy of nervous laughter isn't the awkwardness in the moment. It is that you have taken a single, beautifully flawed, deeply human defense mechanism and turned it into an indictment of your entire identity. The reality is exactly the opposite of what society tells you. The people who struggle the most with nervous laughter are rarely the ones who don't care. Usually, they're the ones who possess the highest levels of cognitive empathy. You don't just see a person's pain, you absorb it. While others move through life reacting, you pause before answering, not because you're unsure, but because you're weighing 10 different possibilities at once. You're analyzing the environment, reading the subtle shifts in tone, and carrying the emotional weight of the room. You process the world in high definition, and sometimes that definition is simply too much. Your laughter is not a sign of emptiness, it is a symptom of overflowing. Experiencing a massive wave of paradoxical emotion does not mean you are cold or contradictory. It simply means you are unlearning a lifetime of managing everyone else's comfort. It means your body is trying to protect you from an emotional depth that you haven't yet learned how to navigate. So, the next time a heavy moment arrives and you feel that familiar, terrifying smile creeping up your face, do not panic. Do not fall into the trap of self-hatred and rumination. Instead, take a quiet breath. Recognize that your nervous system is simply overwhelmed by the complex reality of human suffering. It is okay to look at the person in front of you and say, "I am so sorry. I am feeling so overwhelmed right now that I don't know how to process this. And sometimes my body just smiles when I'm anxious. Please know that I care deeply." That is not a failure. That is vulnerability. And vulnerability creates a far deeper connection than simply performing the right facial expression. You are not broken for laughing in the dark. You are simply a deep thinker in a fast-moving, heavy world, learning to be present without demanding perfection from your own nervous system. If this video helped you recognize yourself or understand someone you love, you are not alone here. This channel is a space for understanding the quieter psychological patterns that shape how we think, connect, and move through the world. If you found this meaningful, consider subscribing so you do not miss future conversations. And remember to drop a comment below about your own journey. Your perspective might help someone else finally feel understood. Thank you for watching. As a brief channel note to our community, please be aware that certain concepts regarding the physiological mechanics of paradoxical emotions and nervous laughter explored today draw on broader psychological research from outside our usual source material, which you may want to independently verify.